Okay, so I stopped at when did the dungeon become the most important aspect of your character's life? You were once an ordinary person. You had hopes and dreams before this place. Perhaps it was a sudden shift, or perhaps you gradually went from one life to another, the dungeon slowly consuming your waking life and your dreams. Unless you were a child born in this dungeon, which perhaps you were, and then you must sculpt a life story around that fact. How did you hear about this dungeon, or what event inspired you to create it? What is at stake if you aren't able to fulfill your duty as a dungeon keeper? Or for what crimes were you imprisoned here? Ask yourself, for how long has this been the world I know? What did you do before the dungeon began consuming your life? Remember when you had a normal job? What was it? Beekeeper? Peasant? Non-dungeon lord? How many dungeons have you been in before this one? How does this compare? Are you a dungeon connoisseur, or is this new for you? Have you visited one dungeon or thousands? What were they like, and how does this one differ? It's good to know these questions, as they'll inform your behavior during your time in the dungeons. How do you generally feel about dungeons? Are they places you enjoy, or are they unpleasant for you? If you were locked in a dungeon cell with a group of strangers, how long before you turned to murder and cannibalism to keep yourself alive? This is always an important question, both in the game and any other you may play. What was the first dungeon you visited, and how did it inform the rest of your life moving forward? As we asked before, what is your history with dungeons? But specifically recall the dungeon you visited as a child, or that perhaps you were born into. Recall the black mold on the sleek stones, the rattling chains, the wind howling down from the towers above, and the other winds howling up from some deep chasm below the corridors through which you walked. You still carry that dungeon with you today. You will carry that dungeon with you always. Enter the shadow cell. It's time to start adding in some details to the dungeon itself. If you want this game to go well, you need to know the facts of the dungeon. But, you might say, how can I know these facts if I'm the dungeon explorer? Is it not unfair for me to have such information? Or, if I'm the dungeon lord, why am I concerned with such details? I want a dungeon, and don't bog me down with details. Or, what has made me such an informed dungeon prisoner? Good questions, all of those. At least until you consider how wrong those questions are. These questions must be answered. How else will you play the game? The trouble is that, yes, for you to know the answers will complicate things. It will strip away mystery and intrigue and add a confused layer of grime over the entirety of the tale. So you must play correctly. No longer a silly game. While we do have some important facts to figure out, it's crucial that you put your shadow self to better use in this game than you ever have before. You may recall a game I taught you once, ages ago, a game where you face off against a small sliver of yourself, where you face your own shadow and hide something from it. You've done things like this throughout the other games you've played, of course, but for this game you must do it again and on a higher level. If you are to play as the explorer or prisoner, then your shadow self must be the keeper and the lord. If you are the lord or keeper, then the shadow self plays as the explorer and the prisoner. This is how it goes. Draw upon the realms that exist within yourself to play this frightening game. Crafting a dungeon experience. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, we have to determine some facts about the dungeon. What kind of dungeon is it? Seriously, what's the end game for this thing? Just a place to keep prisoners? A place to torture prisoners? To kill them? A place to keep a terrible beast? A place to hide treasures? A place to even the score with that one demon? Get the best idea of this you can. What is its purpose today? What was its purpose originally, and where is it headed? Note: upon answering this question, you may wish to scrap your previous conception of your dungeon and start anew. Here's a picture. the mood like? While dungeons skew dreary, it's important to get the most crisp and clear idea of the mood that you can. Really close your eyes and reach a thorough envisioning of the exact experience of being in this dungeon. Sounds, smells, sights. Do you want distant wails of despair echoing through the corridors from prisoners, or will the subtle moaning of lost spirits suffice? A quiet resting place for the dead, or bustling with day-to-day traffic of chained prisoners? Will your cages rest on the ground, or will they sway in the air? Ideally, this mood will send a strong message saying, "Watch out," to anyone who dares enter it. Where is my dungeon? Visualize the general political climate and geography in the area around it. Are you in Germany? Prussia? Some foreign land that never existed? A fantasy world in another realm? Peru? Quebec? When is the dungeon? Sure, this game could have a medieval theme, but it does not have to be in the true medieval times. Sure, dungeons peaked during the Middle Ages, but their charm is timeless. Is it 5,000 years ago? 10,000? 200? Is this a tale of the Byzantine dungeons of 1066, or the dungeons of the French Revolution? The futuristic dungeons of a derelict prison vessel floating through space? What treasures are hidden in the dungeon? What ghosts haunt it? What ghouls walk the halls? Always fun questions to answer. Choosing a dungeon scenario. It's not easy being a warrior, and here, at the end of her life, it seems that Eilon has ended up in chains and is doomed to die. She reaches for her food, beyond her grasp, once again. She used to hear the screams of the other prisoners, but not anymore. Perhaps there is no one left in this dungeon, not even its frightening keeper. But then, aha! She remembers hearing that this dungeon contains a ghost who grants wishes to the dying. If only she can get close enough to death that she may make the wish. I've arrived, Eilon, says the princess ghost of the forbidden dungeon. Now, sister, tell me your wish. And so you now have the tools at your disposal in which you will create an enthralling dungeon experience. There are two major baselines, both of which we have established by now, that you must cling to as you play this game. Beyond that, things are pretty flexible. To reiterate, there must be a dungeon which you have conceived as either yourself or your shadow self. You must have a connection to the dungeon, either as its lord, keeper, prisoner, or explorer. Now we ask the most important question. Are you capable of conceiving and constructing a sprawling dungeon, memorizing each and every corner and trap, and also the greater world with each rhyme and reason for which it exists, all within the confines of your mind and memory? No, while still disappointing, is still an answer that I have accounted for. Since you are unable to conceive of a scenario in which your dungeon is built, consider utilizing one of the scenarios that I have concocted and can vouch for as intelligent, thoughtful, inspiring premises for your first dungeon adventure. Religious themed scenarios. The Holy Grail is in the dungeon. A demon asks to keep a prisoner in the dungeon momentarily. A really bad guy is escaping from the dungeon. Religious. A dragon died in the dungeon. Monster themed scenarios. A really bad guy is escaping from the dungeon. Monster guy. Monster mix up at the dungeon. Who let the monsters out? Logistics themed scenarios. Too many slaves. A really bad guy is escaping from the dungeon. Political prisoner. The dungeon includes a portal to hell that must be sealed off. The dungeon employees have unionized and are striking. We ran out of slaves. A new torture chamber is being added and the funding fell through. Development hell in hell. We need a new wing of the dungeon. A visit from the fire marshal. Ghost-themed scenarios. The dungeon is being used to store stolen art and the art is haunted. Who's moaning? Scenarios inspired by literature. Dracula owns the dungeon. Victor Frankenstein works in the dungeon. A really bad guy is escaping from the dungeon. Frankenstein's monster. Wizard boy in the Tower of London. Scenarios inspired by true events. Exploring the catacombs of Paris. King Tut's treasure is mine. Okay, I cannot pronounce this word. I do not know what this language is or how to pronounce the word. So I'm just going to show you. Where is it? It's right here. If you can see that. A gulag story. A really bad guy is escaping from the dungeon. Prison break. My neighbor is acting suspicious. Did you choose? Are you ready? A journey into the deep. You are now ready. The tools are at your disposal. You have finally learned what a dungeon is, what it isn't, and how to truly bring this dungeon to life. Conceive your role, your scenario, and then finally, construct your dungeon. Your shadow self is ready to go, already plotting surprises for you at the other end of everything. This is my signature game. Perhaps not my only signature game, but something I want my enthusiasts to think of whenever they remember me, particularly after my death. Enjoy. Sincerely, J. Theophrastus Bartholomew. Go. Okay, so that's the end of the dungeon.